Welcome back to Unit 5, Industrialization and the City. We are still learning about how the Industrial Revolution helped to change the United States. So, in our last lesson, I asked you to write a claim about the working conditions during the Industrial Revolution. You should have gathered evidence from the videos that we watched and wrote about how it was hot, crowded, and dangerous. And maybe you also described how the workers had to work some really long hours with very low pay. In today's lesson, we are going to look at what life was like for many Americans during industrialization. So, we're going to kind of dive into the city life and see what it was like for the people who lived during this time period. So, this is a photo of New York City in 1910. And as you can see, there are many skyscrapers and cars on the road, lots of people walking around, probably going to work. You might notice that a lot of these cars look the same because there was not much advancement in that area yet. And this was sort of the beginning of this shift in America's population from rural areas to urban areas. And it was sort of the beginning of these large, crowded cities in America. In source 2 here, we have a photo from 1899 that shows us what 6th Avenue looked like in New York City. And today, that is still a shopping area, but it is much larger. And you can see that the railway here is right next to the shopping area, and there are many, many people crowded in on the street. And it was still a very bustling, busy area in New York City, even in 1899. So during this time, people were moving from rural to urban areas, and as a result, there were many jobs that were being created, and it shifted the jobs being offered away from agriculture areas to more towards these newly available technologies like telephones. This is a telephone switchboard, and these ladies here are working to connect phone calls throughout the city. It wasn't nearly as dangerous as factory life, but they were still quite underpaid for all that they had to do. This source shows us some women working in a sweatshop. They're sewing clothes in a factory-like setting, and during the Industrial Revolution, these sweatshops were very common. These were places with very poor working conditions. People worked very long hours with very low pay. Safety was not really taken into account, and it was usually very crowded and not very well ventilated. So it was very hot in these areas. And as you can see, they are elbow to elbow, working all day on big piles of clothes. It's very crowded in the cities. Here's a source showing us some children working. And people in the cities were very poor. There was not much money to go around, so their children would often have to work to help the families survive. You see, these boys were all newspaper carriers. This boy was on the streets shining the shoes of working men. And these last few sources we're going to look at, they look at the inside of people's homes. You'll notice in the first 2 pictures that the homes are small and quite crowded. Homes in the cities or these urban areas were often overcrowded because it was hard to afford housing. So a lot of people would live together, extended families, moms, dads, uncles, children, whole families would move into one smallish area. Um, and they would often have to stitch up older clothes for kids, so they would have hand-me-downs. They couldn't always afford to or even fit enough furniture in their homes to accommodate all the people. And hygiene wasn't really a thing because homes didn't have running water in this day, and many people had to share one public bathtub and toilet area. So conditions were quite poor in the cities during the Industrial Revolution. And looking at this picture, you can see that this is most likely a rural area. We can tell that because there's a little bit more space in here. They have actual furniture in the house. They're still having to make their own supplies, but there was more room and less poverty in the rural agriculture areas. And again, people in these agriculture areas, they would make their money from farming. They would use the land that they had and the space that they had to grow crops and have animals. And then, as compared to people in the urban areas or in the city who would work in factory settings. So now you're going to use those sources, which, by the way, were primary sources, and those primary sources help us to get a better understanding of what life was really like in the city, because those photographs were all actually taken at the time of the Industrial Revolution. So you're going to use those primary sources to help you answer some questions. First question is, what was housing like for people living in cities? And what was it like to work in factories during this time? C is in a typical family: father, mother, teenage boy and girl, younger child, and an infant. How many family members would you expect to work, and what type of work would you expect them to do? D is, how would you have felt living and working in these conditions? So make sure that you use those sources to help you cite your evidence and support your answers. Once you have paused that, your teacher may have left you a slide that you can go and look at on your Google Classroom, or you may have to go back and rewind and pause this video so that you can look at those sources. Once you've done that, come back to us. And now we're going to make a claim. So you're going to choose 2 ways that life in the city was different than life in a rural area. Go ahead and answer this question on your Google Classroom or jot it down on a piece of paper, and I will see you in our next lesson.